It says in a very famous book, a book that I suspect many of us hold sacred, it says, "In the beginning was the Word." Well, let me take that phrase for a moment. Did your sense of you begin with a word? Did my sense of me begin with a word? Does human interaction ordinarily begin with the word? Does communication between two people ordinarily begin with the word? No. No. In our beginnings was feeling. The beginning of you was your face. The beginning of me was you seeing my face. Human interaction begins with the face. It's no accident we begin this series on communication at the beginning. And the beginning is the face. I would like to introduce you to a partner. This partner is a partner in marriage. She's also a partner professionally. But for the moment, I'm going to invite you to consider her whoever she might be to you. And so I'm going to call her by different names. And I'm going to invite you to look now at Miss Anginelli. There's Miss Anginelli. Take a good look at Mrs. Anginelli. She could be your mother, or she could be your daughter, or your sister, or your employer, or your employee, or your pupil, or your teacher. I invite you to consider all the women, so to speak, or for that matter, even all the men in your life, and imagine this is how you see her, him, at this moment. And when you see her, him, what's the very first thing you want to see? What's the first thing you want to know? And knowing that, what do you say next, and why? Now let's switch. Let's switch from Anginelli to man. We call this one man. This is your mother at the given moment. This is your wife. This is your employer, your teacher, what have you. This is a very, very different looking person than the one we saw a moment ago. And what is the first thing you want to know when you begin a communication? And seeing that, then how do you proceed? So we've seen Anginelli, and we've seen man. Now let's look at somebody we'll call Schwartz. Schwartz. Take a good look at Schwartz. Take a good look at Schwartz. Take a good look at the upper half of the body of Schwartz. And then take a good look at the face of Schwartz. This is not the face we saw with Anginelli or the face we saw of man. I'm coming home, I walk in. I say something. I go to a client, I say something. I go something to a customer, I say something. I'm a pupil approaching a teacher, I say something. What do I say and why? If the communication is particularly significant to me. Well, so much for that. But now we have three others. Who have we seen so far? Anginelli, and man, and Schwartz. Now let's look at somebody we'll call Pritchard. Pritchard. You can guess this is going to be something different. You seeing Pritchard now? You taking a good look at Pritchard? The face of Pritchard in particular is very different. But notice the arms. Notice the arms. We haven't seen arms like this. What is this face saying? And if you know what the face is saying, how do you begin your communication? Well, let's go on to the next. The next is Cantrell. This happens to be the face that two people that are comfortable with each other tend to present to each other most often. Take a good look at this person we're calling Cantrell. Now the arms are relaxed. And if you come to the upper half of the body, and if you then come to the face, and pay particular attention to the area around the mouth, what we're looking for is a relaxed mouth. Yeah, what does that face say? What does that face say? We finally come to a face we all like to see. We'll call this face Jenkins. Here's Jenkins. Do you see Jenkins? That's Jenkins. It could be our daughter. It could be a client. That's the face of Jenkins. Huh. Well, so much for these 6 different people. I'm obviously suggesting, if you'll let me sound a little bit like someone that knows something about the brain for a while, that we begin human interaction by turning off the left side of the brain, that part of the brain that has to do with paying attention to words and syntax and semantics and meanings of words, and turn on the right side of the brain and see nonverbal behavior. Now, if we're going to be looking at nonverbal behavior, I need to share with you a particular classification of nonverbal behavior. We're going to be looking now at a classification of nonverbal behavior on the screen, and you're going to see something called Illustrators, whatever those might be, Emblems, Regulators, Expressors, Simulators, and Adaptors. Those are all different kinds of nonverbal behaviors, and there's two in particular that we're going to emphasize. Well, let's go through them one at a time. Let's take Illustrators. Now come back to me for a moment and take a good look at me. What are Illustrators? Illustrators are nonverbal behaviors which are used to illustrate whatever's being said. I was walking down the street and I turned a corner and suddenly in front of me I saw a dog that high. All those are illustrators. We are not focusing on illustrators, nor are we focusing on emblems or regulators. Emblems are non-verbal behaviors that indicate a particular something. Let's take a look at emblems, or let's take a look at regulators. Emblems. If you and I are doing something very well, and I want to indicate to you non-verbally that we're doing it very well, I may suddenly say to you, and you know what I mean, you know what I'm saying. However, I advise you to be careful in making an interpretation of what that means. That means something very different in Egypt, for example, than it does in the United States. We're not focusing on emblems, nor are we focusing so much on regulators. Now, what are regulators? Regulators are nonverbal behaviors that are learned by our children very early, that are utilized to regulate the control and flow of language. In our culture, by and large, you indicate you're listening to me by looking at me. We say to our children, look at me when I talk to you. However, that's not true of all cultures. There's a subculture in the United States, for example, where people indicate listening by not looking. They're called Indians, American Indians. We use regulators to indicate that we're asking a question, or that we're making a point, or that we're thinking very hard. Now, we're not talking about regulators either. Let me make a point. Illustrators and emblems and regulators are all learned. They're highly idiosyncratic. By that, I simply mean they vary tremendously from culture to culture, from person to person. They're not universal in their interpretation. When we get to expressors, now that's another matter. Over 100 years ago, Charles Darwin, for those of you that may be familiar with him and his work, wrote what he considered his most important piece of work. And some of you that know him and his work may be surprised to learn that he viewed as his most significant piece of work the expression of emotion in man and animals. He postulated something that 100 years later has turned out to be true. Now, I'm not going to bother you with all the scientific evidence. I will simply make the statement. When the human face expresses one of the primary emotions in an undisguised fashion, it is universal, independent of culture, independent of family, independent of training, when it's expressed in an undisguised fashion. It makes no difference whether the face is old or young or black or white, grew up in the highlands of New Guinea or Australia or Japan, Oklahoma, New York, or Miami. When you see the face of a primary emotion when it's expressed in an undisguised fashion, it is universal and independent of culture. Then there are simulators. Simulators are also learned. Simulators, especially facial simulators, are facial expressions which are utilized to either exaggerate or disguise, or in some instances even hide an emotion. We're going to get to those. They're the phony smile. They're the phony thin lip. When one sees a simulator or a thin lip, It indicates that some emotion is being hidden or pretended or exaggerated. It becomes important in communication to notice simulators. Finally, there are adapters. 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 As the word implies, adapters are nonverbal behaviors which indicate how a given individual tends to adapt to a given situation. If you pretend for the moment, for example, that you are a physician and you're walking through a hospital and you're seeing a series of 3 patients, and you say to these 3 patients, "Are you all set for your surgery?" Now ask yourself a question. What should a normal person feel going to surgery? Most, you would acknowledge, would feel a certain amount of fear. Now watch me carefully. You say to the first person, "Are you all fit for your surgery?" I'll take off my glasses so you can see. And this patient says, "Yes, certainly," and then does this. This is an adapter that I'm using. This adapter says something about how the individual adapts to what the face tells you. You walk to the next room. You say to that person, "Are you all set for the surgery?" And that patient in this instance says, "Certainly." You notice that. That says something different than this as a way of adapting to that of surgery. Or you say to the next patient, "Are you all set for your surgery?" And this patient says, "Certainly." Now you see, those are 3 different adapters. But what adapters mean are not universal. They tend to be they tend to be consistent to a given person. And one of the characteristics of good communicators is they not only pay attention to the face, but they over time begin to pay attention to the way a given face tends to adapt to a given situation. So what are we focusing on? Not illustrators, not emblems, not regulators, to some degree adapters, to some degree simulators. In the beginning is the face, and what we're looking for in the face is the evidence for a primary emotion, the major emotion, the emotions out of which all others are built. Now, Jane, let's take a look and let's see the list of primary emotions, and let's give the people watching our tape an example in pure form of the various primary emotions.
There are 7 primary emotions. They are acceptance, disgust, surprise, joy, fear, anger, and sadness. Gordon will demonstrate those for us. This is the face of acceptance. How are you today?
Fine. Now take a look at that face. Fine. It looks expressionless. It's the most common face with the feeling of acceptance. As a matter of fact, it's so common, sometimes people have a hard time attaching a feeling to it. Fine. The face looks blank. The mouth is relaxed. Fine. She asked, "How are you feeling today?" And the word said, "Fine." The face says, "Fine." The word and the face match. The face and the word are congruent. That's important. Fine. So we go to the next.
How are you today, Gordon?
Fine. This is the face of?
Disgust.
Face of disgust. Fine. Now take a look here. The upper half of the face hasn't really changed. Disgust involves the lower half of the face. The lower half of the face. Blech! Yeah, you're getting the idea. Disgust. Blech! In the world, in order to survive, I need to be able to accept. But not everything is to be accepted. When babies are born, they know how already to take in. Babies know how to do this. Taking in. Fine. But babies also know how to do this. Bleh, bleh, bleh. So she says, "How are you today?" And the word says, "Fine," but the face says, "Fine?" No, the face says, "Disgust, disgust." Now let's see, did we see any one of those people we met earlier looking at us with a face of disgust? Let's go on to the next.
How are you today, Gordon?
Fine.
This is the face of surprise.
The eyes are wide open. Sometimes there's ridges up here. The mouth pops open, but the teeth are not prominent. The face says, "I'm surprised." How are you today? Fine. How things are going at work? Okay. I am surprised. That's a universal face in all cultures when it's expressed in an undisguised fashion. That is the face of surprise. So let's go on to the next.
How are you today, Gordon?
Fine.
Ah, that's the face of...
I'm feeling fine. I had a great day, honey. I want to tell you. That is a universal face of joy or happiness. Now, I want you to pay particular attention to the fact that it involves the whole face. It is in no sense simply limited to the lower half of the face. If you say to me, how are you today? And I say, fine. You see, that's different. That's different. That may be an emblem indicating I mean to be friendly, or it may be a simulator to cover up something else. But if joy comes when the baby looks at mama and finally says, ha ha, that's my mama, we all universally respond to that. That is the face of joy, of happiness, in all cultures, in all peoples, when it's expressed in undisguised fashion. Indeed, I feel fine. So let's go to the next.
How are you today?
Fine.
That is the face of fear.
And it's not only the face of fear. Fear tends to talk at the height of inspiration. Did you notice what I did? I said, fine, fine. Surprise simply pops the eyes open. But with fear, the corrugator muscle, it's called, begins to put ridges right here. And sometimes the teeth are withdrawn and the head is drawn back. Fine, fine. Son, how'd it go at school today? Fine, Mom, thanks. Well, how did our new computer work out? Well, fine. She says to you, if you are a representative of one sort or another to a given client of yours. That is a universal face of fear in all cultures, independent of cultures, when it's expressed in undisguised fashion. Now, these are the primary emotions. We're going to go to I want to make a point at this point. There aren't any others. All those things that we call jealousy and envy and pride, all those other feeling words are combinations of these various primary emotions. So we've seen so far what? Acceptance, disgust, surprise, joy, fear, and now comes the next.
How are you today, Gordon?
Fine.
That is the face of anger.
Ah! The head jets forward. The eyes narrow, and again a frown kind of appears, and the muscles around the jaw tense. When it's in an undisguised fashion, it's "Gah! Rah!" Now, of course, in our culture, we're taught very much to modify that, so very often one sees this face with the mouth closed. Fine. I don't know why you asked, but it's fine. Interestingly, in our culture, many people can't tell the difference between disgust and anger, and we may get back to that. We have one final primary emotion.
And how are you today?
Fine.
That is the face of sadness.
And you notice my eyes are not looking at you. The other primary emotions are eye-to-eye contact. But with sadness, we look down, and we're sad alone. And the face falls, and the eyes look down. Now, if I'm going to start crying, then the corrugator is used again, and the tears come. My teacher told me I wasn't going to go into the 4th grade. And that is the face of sadness, and it's universal in men and in women, in blacks and in whites. And in the beginning is the word? No, in the beginning is the face. The faces of the primary emotions. Acceptance, disgust, surprise, joy, fear, anger, and finally sadness. Go through them again, Jane.
All right, we'll go through them once more for you.
We want to see them.
Acceptance,
Here we go.
disgust, surprise, joy, fear, anger, and sadness.
Well, we are going to be focusing primarily through the remainder of this tape on what might be called the diseasing or the disquieting or the discomforting emotions. And why might we want to focus on those? We focus on those, but because when we come to the diseasing or the disquieting emotions, that is when effective communication sometimes tends to break down. We're going to be looking at fear and anger and sadness as emotions and how they're connected to particular kind of losses or frustrations or injuries, what we call stresses. So now let's see on the screen, so that you can review it, how this all works. Now you will notice in the red there's fear, anger, and sadness in that order. Clear down on the bottom, those are emotions. That's the raw data. That's what we infer in the faces and the behavior of people, and that's how they tell us how they feel with words. When I look at somebody, I see what might be called objective evidence. But you can guess how I feel by looking at me, but the truth of the matter is you can't really know in all instances how I feel unless I tell you. I tell you I'm sad or angry or afraid with words that I use. Now, one doesn't have to have an awful lot of fancy training in order to be able to answer the question, why do people ordinarily, if they're healthy people, and let me use the word non-neurotic, healthy, non-neurotic individuals, they have an official name, by the way, they're called genital characters. When do ordinarily people feel sad? Well, they feel sad when they're going through a process of grieving in response to a loss, in fact or fantasy, real or symbolic. You expect me to feel sad if somebody important to me, for example, dies. Let's skip anger for a moment and go to fear. When do you expect me, if I'm a normal person, to feel fear? Well, it's when I'm going through a process called anxiety, comparable to grief. Here, the stress is injury, in fact or in fantasy. If somebody's holding a gun on me, you expect me to feel scared. If I cough up blood in the morning, you expect me to feel afraid. Normal, healthy, non-neurotic individuals, when they judge or in a trusting situation, feel afraid and look afraid appropriately. They are congruent between the way they look and the way they feel. Anger is next. And now we have a problem in our culture, because there's a great deal in our culture, as we'll hear in a minute when the word comes, that teaches that all anger must be related to hostility. In fact, most anger as a feeling is not related to hostility. It's related to a process called aggression, triggered by what's known here formally as frustration. Now here I'm using the word differently than saying I feel frustrated. Frustration here means that there's some need I have that's significant, that's important. I am thirsty and I need water. It is the feeling of anger, if you will, that allows me to be aggressive in the process of getting water. If, for example, I'm in the middle of a desert and without water. I need food. I need a woman, or I need a man, as the case may apply. I need respect. So ordinarily, if we're dealing with straight people, healthy individuals who are in a trusting situation, when they look sad, they say they feel sad, and they're experiencing a loss. So they look angry, frustration, fear, and injury. Well, now let's go back, if you will, to some of the persons we saw at the beginning of this videotape. And now let's take a look, for example, at what did we call her? I believe it was Schwartz. Let's take a look at Schwartz. Now you're looking at Schwartz, and you notice the way the feet are crossed and the hands are very relaxed and the face is looking down, and as we come closer and closer into the face, we see that there is sadness. Now, I suppose, let me imagine for the moment, Janie, sitting over there, that you are my wife, and I come home in the evening and I say, well, Janie, how are you feeling? What would you say?
Oh, I'm sad.
Well, yes, she said. I find her sadness believable, because when people look the way they say they feel, they're believable. She looks and feels sad. I might therefore say to her, well, yes, you look sad, and then I'm ready for the next step. What has you so sad?
Well, I'm not sure.
Well, she's not sure, and now our talking with each other may help discover where the sadness comes from. Well, let's go to anger for a moment. Do you remember the name of the person who was angry? Well, we called her Pritchard. Let's look at the angry one all over again. If we assume this angry one called Pritchard, and notice the foot bouncing up and down in a very tight and controlled way in which she is sitting. She's so controlled, I even find myself wondering if she's aware that she is communicating anger. You see, people can communicate something with the face without necessarily know it in terms of their feeling. And there she sits. There must be, if this is normal or non-neurotic, it has something to do with the dis-easing emotion, anger, and the anger clues me to the frustration. I might say to her, well, dear, how did your day go today?
Well, the usual.
The usual.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wonder how you're feeling.
Well, it's been a little upsetting.
A little upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
Now pay attention to the word that she used, upsetting. What is upsetting? When somebody says they feel upset, how do they feel? Well, the answer is, you and I don't know. You and I don't know. People use the word upsetting as a cover for all kinds of feelings. Some people might mean afraid, or sad, or disgusted, or angry. My guess, by looking at her body, that she might not be completely open to the feeling that she was communicating, in a sense, was borne out because she isn't saying straight out, I'm feeling irritated, I'm feeling annoyed. She looks irritated, she looks annoyed, but whether she's feeling it is still a bit of a question, unless I know her so well that I know that when she says she's upset, it means that she is angry. You know anybody like that, that sometimes looks angry but apparently doesn't feel it? I do. You know anybody that sometimes looks sad but apparently doesn't feel it? Or if you say, how are you feeling today? They say fine and smile, and yet they go back to looking sad. You can see why I'm saying that the disquieting emotions, when people are not congruent, that is, if they don't look how they feel and feel how they look, poses a major communication problem. Well, let's go to the next one then of these three major dis-easing emotions. Let's see, what did we call her? That lady that looked afraid? Oh yes, her name was Anginelli. Anginelli. Let's take a look at Anginelli. Now it just happens that Jane and I are role-playing in a fashion here where these are all women. They could be all men. You know, there's Anginelli. Now we ask ourselves the question, when do normal people feel afraid? When do the normal people look afraid? Well, something threatening has occurred. We don't know what it is, but we would assume that something is threatening. In reality, not in fantasy, not in her imagination. That's another story. In reality. So I might say to her coming home, well, how's your day gone, dear?
It's been a really scary day.
Well, you look scared. You notice she is congruent. She looks scared. She feels scared. I say, you look scared. I confirm that she looks the way she feels. That's an effective way of beginning a communication. And so what would you imagine I say next? Think for a moment. Yes, I'm going to say, what has you scared?
Well, there was a man who tried to break in the house today.
Now let me ask you, if there's a man that tries to break into your house, is that a reason to be scared? Is that a normal reason to be scared? I would submit to you that her not feeling scared, her not looking scared, would be, if you'll let me use the term, not normal, non-neurotic, or not normal and neurotic, and pose a communication problem. So, what have we said? We have said the face tells me something about the uniqueness of the individual at a given moment in time. I must monitor, I want to monitor the face of people when I'm in a communication that is not just automatic, when I'm in a communication that is significant. It's significant because I'm married to him, her. It's significant because I want to understand this particular client if I'm an attorney. I want to understand my attorney if I am the client. I want to know where to start and where to go. The royal road to knowing a given individual at a given moment is being very accurate in seeing the face. And then having seen the face, hearing the word. Healthy, non-neurotic individuals look the way they feel and they feel the way they look. They look the way they feel and they feel the way they look. Yes, I'm irritated. Yes, I'm annoyed. Yes, I'm frightened. I certainly am frightened. I'm comfortable. I've had a very comfortable day today. Blah, 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 blah. They look how they feel and they feel how they look. But then the word comes. The word comes. And the word comes, the word brings with it certain rules. Now let's take a look at those rules. Let's take a look at those rules. There are elicitor rules and display rules and recognition rules. In the beginning is the face, but then the word comes. And every culture, every society, every school, every church, every mother, every father teaches us what is supposed to elicit the various primary emotions. What's supposed to disgust us. We haven't talked much about disgust, and we may not have much time on this particular tape, but it's a very important emotion. You teach me, you teach me, you teach me your value system by my seeing your face of disgust in the presence of a particular behavior of mine of one kind or another. Elicitor rules. We are not going to spend time on elicitor rules, except I suppose if somebody's very significant to me, I would like to know what they've been taught to fear, to be angry with, to be sad about, to be disgusted with. If I want to know me, Gordon Deckert, communicating with you, whoever you are, it's an advantage for me to know my past from whence I cometh. What was I taught to be disgusted with, afraid of, angry at, sad about? Those are elicitor rules. I'm going to skip display rules for a minute and go to recognition rules. There's a very interesting problem. Some of you may be thinking, well, this is all very obvious. Well, it is, except when the culture comes and the word comes, we are taught what it is we're not supposed to see. I do a great deal of work with teaching various health professionals and people that work with people like attorneys and people that work with people like social workers, and I professionally see individuals in counseling sessions who have trouble talking with each other, whether it's fathers and sons or mothers and daughters, and I give workshops all over the country to sales representatives. And we have standard ways of testing it, and the truth of the matter is, unless we have a very different kind of training as adults, we never quite discover what it is that we are been taught not to see. Now, if you stop to think about it, if I tend not to see the evidence for a man scared, or not see the evidence for a woman angry, then I am at the very first moment of interaction in communication, I'm in difficulty. I'm in difficulty no matter what my role is, because I don't see the evidence. I don't see the feeling in the person. I don't see their beginning at this moment. And so this tape is a very useful one in the sense for you to go through over and over and over again, maybe with the sound off. And in the process of going through it, begin to discover what you tend not to see. Now, I can tell you what I was taught not to see. I can't tell you what you were taught not to see. I had to discover the hard way through my training and my professional experience that I, in a sense, was taught not to see evidence for women angry. That's interesting. And I was also taught not to see evidence for men sad. Well, let's get back to, if you will, the display rules. We've talked about the emblem rules and the display rules, but let's get back to the display rules. What are display rules, do you suppose? What would you guess? Think about it. Culture teaches us under what circumstance we are allowed to display or not display our primary emotions. It also teaches us how to hide or cover some of our primary emotions. And here is where we approach a sexual double standard that has more impact on what happens between two human beings than the more frequently talked about double standard having to do with sexual behavior. Let me demonstrate with Janie helping here again what in the world we're meaning. Let's see Mrs. Pritchard again. And let's look at Mrs. Pritchard or Ms. Pritchard. And now you see Mrs. Pritchard. And she looks what? Angry? Yes, she looks angry. Let's assume for the moment that this Mrs. Pritchard who looks angry is normal, is not neurotic. She's in a trusting situation. She's going to look how she feels, and she's going to feel how she looks. I have a relationship with her. Let's say I'm a colleague at work in an office, and I say to her, Jane Pritchard, how in the world are you?
Well, I'm really angry today.
You look annoyed.
Yes, I am.
Okay, what has you so irritated?
Oh, that crazy machine ate half the work I did yesterday.
All right, now let's start all over again. Keep looking at Pritchard. Now let's see Pritchard with Oh, damn. If you'll excuse the word, there is a smile. It's a smile in the lower half of the face. Is that really the face of joy? No, that's not the face of joy. That's a simulator. That smile is a lie, in a sense. We have been taught to pay attention in our culture to the mouth, and the interesting thing is if I lie to other people about a feeling, I soon end up lying to myself. So you see now a very frowning face on the top, that's still angry, but down below is the smile. If you learn nothing else from this tape, learn the following. In an important communication, if you see a mouth that is smiling, take a good look at the eyes. If the eyes are not smiling, it is not joy, it is something else. Well, now let's role play, Janie. Let's go through the same thing. Let's see Pritchard with the smile. There it is. There it is. Well, hello, Jane Pritchard. How are you feeling today?
Oh, just fine.
You're really feeling fine?
Well,
Is anything bothering you here in the office?
oh, not really.
Well, it's funny. I looked at you, and you looked like you were bothered or irritated or something. Are you irritated?
Oh, really? You thought I was irritated?
You're not feeling irritated?
Well, not exactly.
No. Well, let's see Anginelli. Let's go to another one. There's Anginelli. Let's say she's in the office too. Now, Anginelli looks afraid. If I know Anginelli well, and I know that she is healthy and non-neurotic, if she looks afraid, she's going to feel afraid. My gracious, you look scared, I might say to her very directly. You look scared. What's happened?
Well, I am scared.
What has you scared, huh?
Well, it's just been, I don't know what's going on around here.
Something strange has happened?
Really?
All right, now we're off and running. We're off and running. But now let's look at the same Anginelli. Let's look at the same Anginelli in whatever context you want to look at it. And now let's see Anginelli with the smile. What would you judge? And this is what is known as display rules. This is display rules. And you're seeing in her a smile. A smile. Well, Janie, you can relax now. And let me talk about this a minute, this display rule business. What's the consequence if I look a feeling, but I don't feel it? What's the consequence if I go around looking irritated, if I go around looking mean, and my son or my wife or my colleagues respond to what? They respond to the way I look, but I don't acknowledge that I feel it. I don't acknowledge that I feel it. The consequence that human beings experience if they look a feeling but don't feel it is that they are forever mystified why people respond to them the way they do. Did you hear what I just said? There are individuals watching this tape who don't understand why people seem to avoid them, or people tend to respond to them in a certain way. If I don't feel the way I look, I pay the price of not understanding why people respond to me the way they do. But now let's look at it another way, and I'll play this one straight out. What's the consequence for people who feel something but don't look it? So you say to me, well, Dr. Deckert, how are you feeling today? And I say to you, I use nonsense syllables so that you would pay attention to my face. My face seems to show acceptance, comfort. But now listen to the semantics, listen to the words. How are you feeling today, Dr. Deckert? Well, I am so anxious and so nervous and so frightened that I think I'm going to lose my mind and have to go into the hospital and have a nervous breakdown. Oh, my gracious. A person that feels something but doesn't look it, what did he just say? What did I just say? A person who feels something but doesn't look it pays the price of not being believed. Not being believed. All right, now let's take a look at the display rules in our culture. What are the display rules for men? How can men look? Huh? A man, if he's a real man, man can be firm, a man can be direct, man can be irritated, but if a man's a real man, does he look scared? No. Men, it's all right if ladies get scared. It's all right if ladies get scared. It's all right if ladies look scared. But men are not supposed to get scared, especially if they're from Oklahoma like I am and walk around with boots. You're not supposed to be scared, even if a tornado's coming out of the west. You're not supposed to be scared. And you're sure not supposed to cry. Men are not supposed to cry. It's supposed to be unmanly. It's supposed to be unmanly to be a man and cry. It's all right if ladies cry, but men are not supposed to cry. So what are men taught to do instead? You women, you females watching this tape already know. Not all men who come across irritated or annoyed are basically angry. I sometimes use the angry, brusque demeanor and face to cover up basic feelings of fear and or sadness. You hear what I'm saying, if I can use the word again. Our culture teaches us to be neurotic. Men are taught not to look sad and not to look afraid, and in some instances, they're not even supposed to feel it. No wonder there's so much problem with communication. No wonder there's so much problem with communication. Well, now let's turn it around, though. Let's turn it around. What about women? What are women taught in our culture? Think about it. Women are taught that they're not supposed to come across in an angry fashion. Not a lady. A lady isn't supposed to say, "Ah, damn it to hell!" Ladies are not supposed to say that. And so as a result, women in our culture can be feeling very frustrated and very angry, but since they don't look it, they tend not to be believed. So it's perfectly possible I'm communicating with someone and I'm communicating with a woman. And Janie, the woman can be sad and the woman can be crying. And I can say to the woman, I see that you're crying. And the woman says back, yes, I am. And then I say to them, well, how do you feel? And very often I hear, I'm so frustrated and annoyed and irritated with my life, I can't believe it. And then I sometimes say back to them, at least in my professional capacity, if I have the contract, you say you're feeling irritated? And she says, yes. And I say, but you're crying. I will say to you watching this tape, it is as confusing in communication. It's even neurotic. To cry when one is angry, to cry when one is afraid, is as confusing and, if you will, neurotic as it is for a man to shout or look angry when he's scared or he's sad. We are talking about display rules. Display rules. And display rules are incredibly important. Now let's review. Let's review. Where are we in this tape so far? We said in the beginning was the word? No, in the beginning was the face. And if I'm beginning a human communication of significance to me, I will turn on what I see. I will become alert to what I see. And over time, I will train myself to see accurately. I want to see the face of the various primary emotions. What are the primary emotions? Well, we've been there already. If I see a face of acceptance, then communication is going to flow without too much difficulty. If I see the face of disgust, now I've got more of a problem. More of a problem. Disgust says what? I want to be rid of something. I don't like something. I see the face of surprise. If I see the face of surprise, what might I say? I might say, you look surprised. If I see the face of joy, what might I say? The same with fear and anger and sadness. So be it. We said we wanted to focus on expressors, to some degree simulators, to some degree adapters. Let's just for the moment stop at adapters. Let's stop at adapters for a moment. Let's go back to those three patients when I asked you to pretend, if you aren't already a physician. And you say to the first patient as a physician, well, Gordon, how are you feeling? Are you all set for your surgery? And this man says, certainly. Now you know to see the face of fear. But then you see him do this. That's an adapter. Now I'm going to ask you to think. Where in the world do you suppose that comes from? Where do you suppose that it comes from? Well, I'm going to surprise you. I'm going to get down on my knees here in a minute. I'm going to be a little bitty boy. Once upon a time, I was a little bitty boy. once upon a time I was a little bitty boy, and when I was a little bitty boy like you were little bitty boys and girls, I would go up to my mom and my daddy and I'd say, what's that? What's that noise, Mama? What's that? And they would say to me,
There, don't be afraid.
That's what they would say. There, don't be afraid. That's a very characteristic way in our culture of dealing with boys. It's not the way we deal with females. And so since she's not around, I say, there, don't be afraid. My adapter tells you I deal with fear by reassuring myself. If I am significant to you in whatever capacity, and we have a relationship that makes a difference, if I show fear and you see this adapter, you know that in a sense what I tend to use on myself is what you're likely to use on myself that will be effective, namely some sort of honest reassurance. The other patient, on the other hand, are you all set for the surgery? And he said, certainly. Now, that's a very characteristic gesture. It's called the respiratory avoidance response. It's almost universal. It means almost the negative of what the person says. It means I want to be rid of something. It means I want to be rid of something. Somebody significant comes home tonight and you say to him, her, how would you like to go out to a restaurant? And she says, oh, that'd be wonderful. The word says that would be wonderful, but now there's something about it that I want to be rid of. I deal with my fear by wanting to be rid of it. That requires a different approach. Whether the person I'm talking to is my son or my daughter or my employer, my employee, my client, you name it. The next patient. Are you all set for your surgery? Certainly. And now stop to think about that. What in the world could that mean? Now I warn you that adapters are not universal. Adapters mean different things to different people. But this, if you think about it, what am I doing to myself? I'm telling you with my adapter that I blame myself for being anxious. I turn on myself. I attack myself. This is a person who might be very prone under certain circumstances to feel considerable guilt. Well, where are we? In the beginning is the Word. No, in the beginning is the face. And it turns out to be much more complicated because there's things called blends. We aren't even going to hardly have time to touch on that. But you could ask yourself the question, what would a face look like if someone was both afraid and angry at the same time? I'm scared, but I'm determined anyhow, in spite of being scared. And by the way, that's a dangerous face. If you confront a strange face that looks both scared and angry, that's a face that impulsively can attack. They're combination of faces of disgust and anger. That's an important one. Anger is not disgust, and disgust is not anger. Unfortunately, many of us grew up in the presence of faces that included both anger and disgust. Let me simulate for a minute. I have a grandbaby now, and if I say to my grandbaby when she visits us, our grandgirl, as she's eating with her hands, I say to her, now, honey, in this house we eat with a spoon. Honey, we eat with a spoon. We eat with a spoon. My face of disgust says, our value in this house is that we eat with spoons and not with fists. Children are not terribly bothered with that. On the other hand, if she eats with her fist and I say, now listen here, would you please stop eating with your hand like that? Eat with a spoon. Now that's pretty frightening to a child because the face is saying anger. But now look what happens if I put anger and disgust together. Can't you eat with a spoon, for gosh sakes? My face says, I'm disgusted with you and I'm willing to, in a sense, get rid of you, to throw you out with the face of anger. Anger plus disgust is a devastating face to a child. Now, many of us in our culture grew up with that face. And since we grew up with that face, some of us cannot distinguish. We call disgust anger and anger disgust, and they're not the same. So we're talking about blends. We're talking about sequences. What did I just say? I said a sequence. As you tune into this, as you talk with individuals, there are sequences. You say something to me, and I look surprised. And then the surprise turns to, ha ha! Oh boy! I'm surprised in a pleasant way. You say something to me, I look surprised. And then I get scared because the surprise has something threatening. That is a sequence. There are whole nonverbal sentences. Whole nonverbal sentences. You might say to me as a son, you might say to me, well, son, how did your day go? And I might say, well, fine, Mom. All those have a particular unique meaning, but the only one that is universal is the face that expresses a primary emotion. Well, we're getting close to the end. I hope this has been a useful tape. It's a tape of a series having to do with communication, and of course we've begun at the beginning, and the beginning is not with the word. The beginning is with the face. I enjoyed making this tape. We thank you very much. We thank you.